Hey everybody, welcome to PlanCo Spotlights. My name is Silvarret, and today I've got a coaster showcase for you. In particular, we're looking at Heidi The Ride at Plopsaland in Belgium, made by Heidi The Ride. Now before I go on with the rest of the video, I just want to give a very quick reminder that this channel is dedicated to Special Effects, the UK-based charity for people with a disability who allow people who might not even otherwise be able to play games the way that we enjoy them as well. And if you want to learn more about them, you can find a link to them in the description, as well as a link to the Just Giving page where you can donate. Also, and this is a little bit more of a personal interjection, this channel is also kind of dedicated to the PlanCo community in general, so if you're now thinking, hey, I'm kind of part of the PlanCo community, and you've got any kind of thing, whatever it is that you've made in Planet Coaster that you want to show off and have the world see, then the link will be in the description to the submissions form where you can submit whatever it is that you're making in Planet Coaster, and maybe in the future you'll see it pop up in this channel, just like in this video. In any case, let's get on with the video, and this is a little bit of an unusual thing, because so far, at least at the time of me recording this video, there haven't been any recreations, and me being me, I want to give a little bit of an introduction into this coaster before we go on, because I think that'll be interesting. And before I allow myself to completely go loose, as some nerd rant will inevitably happen at some point, the description that Heidi The Ride himself gave for this ride is Heidi The Ride and Heidi Land in Plopsaland, Belgium, meaning that the little bit of area with all of these buildings and scenery around Heidi The Ride itself is also included in the blueprint. And yeah, this whole thing actually fits on a blueprint, which is one of the things that really surprised me, since there's quite a bit of scenery added to this roller coaster within the blueprint, and very well within the 4,000 piece limit as well. And he goes on to say, there are 2 trains on the track, drinks and restaurants, and Heidi Land. The whole area is built by making photos in the real park, which is really interesting, and Heidi The Ride is rebuilt from the ground plan found on the internet. 60 hours of building will make me proud. This is my first real big coaster build. So I'm very curious to see how this is gonna end up looking. Just kidding, I actually already checked through this whole thing. I'll be happy to show this thing off to you, of course. And as well, I'll give a little bit of tips here and there where I think there's some room for improvements. But more or less just show off what makes this a really cool blueprint. Also, just some of those personal notes that I wanted to add in here. I think this is a really interesting ride for the channel because it's a recreation, and as such, you sort of look at it in a slightly different light. And this ride in real life, for those who are uninitiated, because this is not a very well-known ride in international roller coaster circles, I suppose, if you can say so. This ride is in Plopsaland, which is a Studio 100, or I guess I should call it Studio 100, which would be the Belgian name, which is a studio which produces all kinds of media entertainment. So I think you can sort of compare the park to a smaller, lower budget form of Universal Studios. The park has some scenery and it has some roller coasters, and it's all based around these certain media properties. And Heidi is one of them. Heidi is basically a 3D animation series by Studio 100. And very interestingly, this series is based on the movie from the 70s, made by Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki. So, in a way, because those are the 2 guys that founded Studio Ghibli, so in a way this is the world's one and only sort of Studio Ghibli roller coaster. It's actually before, it was, I think, from the time before they founded the studio, but it's based on the whole theme of Heidi, who is this girl from the Alps, and who you go on all these amazing adventures with. I know of the movie, I haven't seen it, I've only seen bits and bops of the animation series, but it's supposedly quite a nice general media brand, I suppose, for kids, and it's a very charming sort of theme, so very interesting for a roller coaster as well. Now, with all of that talk out of the way, let's actually look at this thing in the game. So, what we get over here is the wooden roller coaster itself, the whole layout based on the way that it looks in real life, as well as this little part of Heidi Land. And the roller coaster is broken down at the moment. That's not very good. Should definitely get some mechanic while I try to look a bit at the surrounding area. And what I find most interesting about this blueprint is in fact this whole area that's been built around it, since it all still fits in a single blueprint somehow with something along 3,000 pieces, which isn't even too much. Although I do have to say, I apologize for my kind of low frame rate. I'm on a laptop right now, since I don't have access to my main computer, and it's somewhere around 30 FPS. That said, I don't think it's really the fault of this ride. I think this would be a really amazing blueprint for many parks, even if it's based on a real life ride, since it just fits in a single blueprint. No need to mess with different blueprints to fit everything together, and it has this nice area of theming around the station here. But as for the rest, you're completely free to fill it in with whatever you like, so I think it fits really well in any kind of park. So as for Heidi Land, the little themed area over here, one thing that I definitely noticed is it seems slightly different from the real life version of it. Some of the buildings, like, they have a very similar composition, but the detailing is quite different, which I don't think necessarily is a bad thing at all, actually. I think there are some very interesting little takeaways that you can get from the scenery in here. One of my favorite parts is actually this building. I guess I'll just take this whole row and sort of go by it piece by piece. What I thought was really cool about this building is that in real life this is just a very simple, straight to the point, boxy alpine building. I don't think the real life version of this scenery area really dares to go out there too much. It's very much realistic, but also it never really does anything unexpected. And that's why I thought it was very interesting the way that this building is detailed differently from in real life, because it has this column in the middle of stone where, and this is something that I really love as an addition to the scenery, it comes out slightly from the normal wall, and it's not even a separate building. It just means that these walls on the side here are turned toward the inside of the grid, and this wall's turned toward the outside of the grid, and then he masked this difference between setting with these cornerstones that actually connect really seamlessly, and they give the whole building this more sort of 3D character and make it a lot more interesting. And one of my personal little usual pet peeves is the placement of chimneys, but even the placement of the chimney right here makes a lot of sense in this sort of weird interjection into the building, since it fits into the same stone column and it's not above any windows or doors. A very common mistake that I'll see people make is that they put a chimney somewhere in a building that would end up exactly above a window or a door, but in this case it neatly connects to this whole sort of stone entrance area. But it still doesn't conflict, and there could very well be a small fire over here at the bottom. So I think that was a very cool addition into this building, something to make it a little bit more unique from real life. Similarly, we've got this building over here next, which has a bunch of other shops in it. This whole sort of area kind of functions as the whole restaurant area, with the stalls over here, and then on the other side this little building where there are some picnic tables and you can just eat whatever you get from whichever shop, which is a very handy setup. And over here we have just a sort of simple, neat wall at the back, sort of set at the back, which is not that interesting, but it works really well with the buildings around it, since these buildings are sort of forward facing and they're much more placed toward the path than this building, so it really helps create a depth in the whole set of buildings over here, which is also quite interesting given that there's this slightly off-center little tower over here, which is also slightly different from its real-life counterparts, but I think it works very well. And again, I think the placement of the chimneys works really well here. It not only looks good, but it would be very realistic that you get some chimney that's slightly more set to the back over here. It's not over any windows or doors and anything. Could be some sort of backstage kitchen area or something like that. And similarly, could be very well a chimney over here with a fireplace downstairs. So I really love the way that these buildings all come together. Also, here he created this also slightly different thing, which is just a glass sort of shop facade. Could be anything in there, but it's just an interesting detail and I think a nice way to deviate from the standard scenery. Now I wanted to note some of these changes because I think they're all really good ways to add some slight variation into buildings. I think the real life counterparts of this area, even though it looks very nice and charming and really carries that Heidi alpine aesthetic, it doesn't really stray away from the standard look too much, and it's kind of afraid to experiment with more interesting detailing, and I think that's something that this build added into the buildings. Whether this was intentional or not, whether it was just from not having that much of a reference point, or whether you actually on purpose made some slight differences, I'm not sure, but I actually quite like the changes that you made to the buildings here, so I really like the scenery around this area. Now as for the rest of these buildings, we just get the sort of general station area over here, so a bunch of large buildings that would supposedly be used to fit the exit and the entrance path as well as the queue. These are some of the things where I can't really tell from pictures on the internet what this ride is really like, and I haven't been there myself, so not too much of a reference point there for me. But I do like that the queue eventually ends up here inside the station, and there's a bit of theming around the station, and even though it's simple, it does set the mood for what's gonna happen later on in the ride. Although I was wondering what was going on with these pink stones in some of the walls. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but regardless of that little thing, I think it's all put together very neatly. And yeah, I think that's just about everything I wanted to say about the entrance area. One more little note that I think is quite interesting is the additions of the beams on the roof, which is something that you'll see in some alpine buildings, and it's one of those little details that even if you're recreating something, you may very quickly overlook because it's just such a minor part, but it's a nice little detail to add into this build. So overall, I love the scenery, I love the look of the whole alpine village, and it does a great job at really setting the whole theme and atmosphere for this ride. Now with all that said, I think it's about time we look at the roller coaster itself. Alright, looks like we're leaving, having that little dip before we go up the lift hill, just like in real life. I like the addition of the lights along the side of the rails as well. I do have to say I don't know that much about this coaster in real life. I've seen some POVs, but oh, here I was sure that we were gonna start, but it seems like we have to wait for the other car to actually catch up with us. Alright, and there we go. So just a little bit of a story. I'm not much of a person who goes wee and wah on a POV video. This is a Great Coasters International wooden coaster, which are known for their super snappy wooden roller coasters, and arguably one of the hardest things to build in Planet Coaster. And it's not very sizable, it's more of a family coaster, but I think from the looks of it, for its size, this coaster is really good and still provides a pretty good thrill. And it seems like the layout in general forms is really well made in this recreation as well. Slowing down a little bit at the end there, I think one of the ways to sort of get over that perhaps is to use the lower friction setting. I noticed that this coaster is using the standard friction setting, but I also have to say this was made quite a while ago, and I believe this was also made before we got the addition of lower friction settings. So yeah, it's a very well made ride overall, and from what I can tell, not being an absolute expert on this, it follows the layouts of the real ride very closely. If I would give any constructive criticism, it would be to use the smoothing tool much more, especially around these parts here and there. The ride is quite janky. Also, I think some of these hills, their issue is that they have these very straight sections in the middle, and then these definite sections where they curve for a little bit, and using the smooth tool would sort of smooth this all out a little bit and make these transitions a lot better. That said, this is the one case where I would be advising to be very careful with actually using the smooth tool and not just radically smoothing everything, since Great Coasters International coasters are extremely hard to make and they're not entirely smooth, as in they do have some snappy transitions that would be impossible with just smoothing in Planet Coaster. But I think for some of the parts here, try to smooth it out a little bit more, and going for a smoother coaster rather than getting the exact GCI feel to it, I think would quite help. Even if you just selected the whole track and hit the smooth button once or twice, I think it would have been a little bit better. That said, again, I don't want to be too hard on the layout, since I've tried to make a GCI coaster once and it took me 6 hours to even get some kind of idea that I was sort of happy with it, but it's still not the way that these things are in real life. These are just some of the hardest, if not the hardest, coasters to get right. And besides, I do have to say, this is one of your older projects, and I've noticed that especially some of your recent projects, you've improved quite a lot and your coasters have become much more smooth compared to this. So that's really good. It's good to see that, you know, you're improving over time. After all, this is, of course, from the description, your first real big coaster, and let's be honest, it takes a while for every one of us to get into this thing. So overall, I think this is a really good build, especially for a real coaster like this. It's really well made, it's a nice recreation of the real ride, with some nice variations and slight minute differences as well, and I think it just works out really well in any kind of blueprint. Especially if you're not as creative or knowledgeable about roller coasters yourself, I think this is one of the blueprints that would work out really well in a park, just because it has that very well-made scenery setting around the station area here, and it comes with some foliage, but at the same time you can fill in this area in any way that you like. So yeah, I think you did a great job recreating this ride, Mike Betonican. I've noticed that in some of your, well, more recent rides, you've gotten even better at the scenery and really starting to pick up on the coaster creator. So I can't wait to see what you're gonna make in the future. And this has been it for this episode of Coaster Spotlight. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank Mikey Betonican for submitting this coaster. And as for you, the viewer, the link for this coaster will be down in the description, so if you want to check this out yourself in the game, you can find it there. And thank you so much for watching this video as well. Make sure to, God, this is the first time I ever say anything like this, but make sure to like this video and share it in any way that you can, or leave any other thing that people can do nowadays on social media, I don't know, comment or so. But yeah, this would really support our channel, which would be great, because in the end this channel is about supporting special effects and about supporting the PlanCo community as a whole. So thanks in any case. My name is Silvarret, and I would like to thank you for watching this video, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future. Bye bye.